My name is Sabine. I am the director of the feature-length film documentary called Epilepsy, and I'm here today with Landis, the host and creator of What the F podcast, which is for epilepsy, I'm going to swear, What the F moments, which is a podcast that chats about the ridiculous, heartbreaking, and funny shit that happens with epilepsy. Which I really love the saying on that I read is that by adding laughter to the conversation, which I think is what we need sometimes. So I'd love to learn about your journey with epilepsy and how that has influenced your life and also your career choices.
Sure, yeah. So I was diagnosed at 32 after having brain surgery to remove a brain tumor, which I'm learning more and more now how that's quite common to develop epilepsy and we're not sure why, but as a result of brain surgery. So it was very strange because I'm in this, like, in my career, I had my own business doing marketing, consulting, and communications, and all of a sudden everything kind of came to a big old halt. First with the brain surgery and then with epilepsy. So, as far as my career choices, like, I was very fortunate in that I was able to get a marketing position at a law firm that was awesome with, like, accommodations. I mean, before pandemic even, I was only going in the office 3 days a week because that's like how much my body could physically allow. I was having seizures, like, it started off at 3, 4 times a week and then eventually moved to like once a week, and then, once every 3 weeks or once a month is kind of where I've been stable for a few years now. But again, like, I just was very lucky that my first job was with epilepsy, was at a place that, one, had good health insurance, and two, was willing to accommodate me. But there was always that feeling of, like, being worried about being perceived as unreliable, because if I have a seizure and miss a meeting or miss a deadline or something, so, like, I was constantly trying to prove myself as someone that was reliable by taking on more work and taking on, like, and offering to do things. I was like, do you need this done? Because I can do it, and just, and then a lot of times it would cause me to have a seizure because I was just pushing myself. And, like, there were times too, because I'm very addicted to productivity, which I think is also called ADHD. But I, like, if I was working on a PowerPoint presentation, and I usually left the office at 3:30 every day. Again, they were great with accommodations. And if, like, I just need to finish this one PowerPoint, and stayed until 5, I was like, okay, good, but I got it done. And without exception, the next day I would have a seizure. And it was just so frustrating because it wasn't like I was, like, out being reckless. I was literally sitting in a cubicle working, and as a result, just pushing myself too hard. And there was also, like, even though the accommodations were awesome, I was so self-conscious about, like, walking out of an office at 3:30 while everyone's still there and watching you leave. And every day I was just like, oh my God, like, don't hate me, don't hate me, don't hate me, like, and then also not being in the office every day was something that I felt like I had a lot of worry about how I was perceived. And I think that just drove me to do more, which then drove me to have more seizures. And eventually, I just started kind of building up and going back to my passion, which is writing. And I was publishing articles in The Independent, NBC, and one more that I can't remember, and about epilepsy. And I was featured in the Chicago Tribune. And I just started to be like, okay, maybe I can do something in this sphere, whether it's with writing or something like that. But I was like, people with epilepsy, sometimes we can't read. Like, not that we can't read, but, like, our brains, like I know postictal, like, I can't read for at least 4 days, So I was like, what about creating a resource that people can listen to and is free? And so that was what kind of motivated me to really just focus in on creating a podcast that is accessible to everyone, everywhere, no matter if you live in a rural community, without a lot of resources, or you're fortunate enough like me to live in Chicago where there's like resources everywhere, and
Yeah.
just create a touchstone for people.
And with that being said, in the workplace too, because I relate to you that way, it kind of becomes a cycle where I don't know if you have this too, but this anxiety of like, could it happen when I'm in the workplace and in public, and having that and the toll that that could, take on your mental health and on yourself. But I love that you channel that then into creating a podcast like this that is accessible, it's free, and I love the way that you approached it as well, because it's very different from what I've seen.
Thank you.
And yeah, I'd love to learn about your approach to it as to why you went the direction of it being something that we can also laugh about our experiences and versus, potentially it being more um, like, not scientific, but more like the formal podcast route.
Yeah, no, totally. I get what you're saying, because like there's so many great epilepsy podcasts out there that are medical research based.
Yeah.
Epilepsy Sparks is like my favorite one by Tori Robinson over in the UK, and it's always like cutting edge research, and I feel so empowered after I listen. It's like 15-minute episodes, so amazing.
Yeah.
And she and I always joke that What the F is kind of like the anecdotal or the supplemental side to hers, where it's like it's a way to empower people, a way to feel seen, but also like epilepsy, like inherent. Sorry, George is like popping in. George,
Yeah, of course.
and very upset about it apparently. Yeah, so What the F is kind of like the anecdotal side where it creates a touchstone for people to feel seen. And even if it's just like a little bit of connecting to someone's story or knowing that they're not alone. And the reason I come at it with humor is because, I mean, epilepsy inherently is not funny, right? But sometimes, like, when enough time has passed, like, some of the shit we go through is fucking hilarious. And the thing is, so my cousin, who was a really good friend of mine, he took his own life because seizures took over his. And that was 2 years before I was diagnosed with epilepsy. And after I was diagnosed, like 6 months into my experience, I completely understood how he felt. Because when seizures are, you're either like recovering from a seizure or having a seizure, it's really hard to see the forest of the trees. And the thing about my cousin Jimmy is that he was the funniest dude you've ever met. And that's kind of how he coped with his epilepsy too, was just like making, by joking about it and talking about how he's like, I went to Seizure Town, and just stupid things like that. And so a lot of it is in his kind of like carrying his light, to bring humor to it and also make it more approachable to talk about, because like it's really hard to sit down and have these tough conversations. But when like we're going to be laughing about the time like when I had a seizure, and I can say this now because I'm married. I think that's why I can say this. I don't know, but like dating is really hard when you're like having seizures on first dates or maybe during intimate moments. And at the time, it's awful. But now, like even before I was married, I was just like, this is fucking hilarious, like that these things are happening. Or like I can laugh about the time I was on the floor of the bathroom stall at work, and like no one knew what to do, and I was just like locked in the stall, and like just kind of that perspective now is funny, where at the time or maybe like a week later it wasn't. But when things turn out okay, when I wasn't hurt on the floor of the bathroom stall, I think it's a way to be a little bit more vulnerable with our condition and have a little bit more of honest conversations by being able to laugh, because sometimes that's like literally all you can do is be like, this is so ridiculous, I don't know what else to do but laugh.
Yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I'm with you on that one. A lot of instances where in the moment it feels rough, but then in retrospect, you're like, that was kind of. I relate to you in using humor to cope, because I'm definitely that. So,
Yeah.
I relate in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think it's like, and it just has to be used carefully. Like, I think humor is such a wonderful coping mechanism, as long as it's not used to deflect, and that's what I try to do with What the F, is just, let's acknowledge the funny, let's acknowledge the shitty, let's acknowledge the silver linings, let's acknowledge all of it, the whole thing, rather than just relying on one, coping mechanism to get you through. Because sometimes humor can be like, and I was definitely guilty of this for the beginning of my journey, was just using humor as a way to not deal with what I was really feeling. So it's just kind of trying to, just like all of life, just trying to find a balancing act.
Exactly. And given all of that, as you were sharing like the backstory to the podcast and your story, has there been any memorable like moments or stories from the podcast since you've started it that have had a significant impact on you and the audience as well? Yeah, and the audience.
Yeah, no, well, first, I'm just going to start off by saying anytime someone DMs me, emails me, leaves a comment, and talks about how an episode has impacted them in a positive way, I lose my shit. Like, in a good way. I am just, like,
Yeah.
overwhelmed. I can, like, oh my God, it hit one human. That's all that matters. Like, it hit one human. Anytime I see it's someone in a rural area listen to the podcast, I, again, just, like, whoosh, bawling, because I'm like, okay, it's doing it. We're getting out there. We're helping people feel less alone. And as far as specific episodes, the one I have gotten the most, there's a few, but the one recently was with B, who is the CEO of the Epilepsy Foundation of America, who had one of the most candid conversations because she hid her epilepsy for her entire professional life until she was CEO of Epilepsy Foundation of America. But she also talks about stigma being associated with shame. And so many people reached out to me and said, wow, I didn't even realize it, until she said it. And then she also brings up family, because not all of us have like a family that we can rely on, or maybe we have like a family that kind of didn't help with, some of our coping. And and people don't want to talk about that because no one wants to call out their own family, right? No one wants to be like, well, this person was an asshole. And she doesn't do that. She just says like, and I looked back and realized that because of this family situation, that's where shame came from. And it was unintentional. And there was no bad meaning behind it. And it was just, again, people reached out to me saying, I'm so glad someone finally said it. Someone finally talked about that. So that episode has had such a big response, as well as one of the first episodes that came out called Dudes and Dating. And an epileptologist who lives with epilepsy, he spoke about, just so much about like growing up with epilepsy and dating and what that looked like. And I think that just, to me, it shows what what an important topic that is to people, adults in the epilepsy sphere. And I can 100% relate to that. Like how dating can be so tough to navigate when you have epilepsy. I mean, it's tough to navigate without epilepsy, right?
Yeah.
Dating is hard. But with epilepsy, it's like, it just adds a different layer. And I think there's just a need to continue that conversation, because so many people, like I even gave a presentation about dating and epilepsy at the national convention like a few years ago, and the questions I kept getting were like, well, when do you tell someone you have epilepsy? And that's like the burning question, right? It's like, I don't know, like it's all person to person. It depends on, do you tell them right up front? Do you tell them when you feel safer? Is it safe for you to not tell someone? And there's just so much that weighs into it. And I think it's just a conversation that needs to continue happening, continue evolving, getting as many perspectives as possible, just so people, again, can feel seen, feel less alone, and know that epilepsy is not a detriment to who you are. And if someone sees it that way, then you've just weeded out some douchebag, because he is not for you, or she. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's you put that into words beautifully, because that's something that shows that epilepsy really can impact every aspect of your life, even these things that, like you said, dating's already rough, but then I remember having that in my head before I came out publicly about it, of like, when do I have that conversation? And is that going to scare someone off if you have that conversation? And then having like that anxiety on top of the general anxiety with the dating world, it's
Right.
like, it's something that people, again, that whole thing of general public sometimes think epilepsy is just a seizure. And you're like, no, it actually impacts all these parts. They're all just a ton of puzzle pieces, you know?
Yep.
So it's great that that's being spoken about more, and it does help people feel seen. Like from what you were saying right now, I felt really seen by that. So,
Oh,
um,
good.
and have you felt that way with friends and colleagues? Because I know I've had that experience where I did not tell friends for years until, you know, now where I felt like I had to. Like, have you had that also with friends and coworkers?
Yeah, I mean, yes and no. You know,
Hmm.
I was so lucky that most of my friends just kind of rallied around it. Not everyone understands it,
Yeah.
even though you try to explain it. And what I've learned is that's okay. Because you kind of have to figure out which of the friends you can rely on when you have a seizure, or not just have a seizure, but like are having a rough day with meds or whatever it is.
Hmm.
Um, so, and just because like not all of your friends make that list, that's fine.
Yeah.
So I have this folder that I keep for when I have a seizure, and I take it out, and it has notes for myself, and it has notes of, because I can't remember, I don't know what the hell's going on. So it's like, here are your favorite movies, here are your favorite places to order food from, here are the friends you can call. And I made a cognizant effort to figure out which are the friends that like would be okay with that. The
Hmm.
thing is, when you're post-ictal, you're still like very foggy, and I will talk myself out of calling any of them. I'll be like, no, I don't want to burden them, and no, that's just like they're busy. And so then what I did was I asked a few friends to write me an email that says if it's okay to call them, and it's literally like 3 sentences long. And I still, if I read them, I still cry because they're so sweet, even though they're like 4 words. But
Yeah.
like one's from my friend Jana, and I printed it out, and that's in that folder too. So when I make an excuse to not call Jana, I have her words that say, call me. I love hearing from you. My daughter does too. It makes our day. Like, so then it brings some logic back into my postictal brain to know who I can reach out to and who I can call on in those moments. And
Hmm.
so I think it's kind of about figuring out who can. Sorry, did you hear that? Did you hear George?
Was that true?
Sorry. He's very grumpy today.
He's like, let me speak.
Yeah, he's so pissed he's not on camera. um, but I think it's about figuring out who you can rely on, and that's not just with friends, but at work too. Like, and this I find very funny now, but like when I was on the bathroom floor at work after a seizure, I asked for one of my coworkers to come. I was like, "Can you go get so and so?" And she came. And I was like, "What do you want me to do?" I was like, "Okay, so that's not the coworker to ask to come anymore, you
Yeah.
know." And in fairness to her, I hadn't given her a heads up. I hadn't told her what to do in that situation. But in my post-ictal state, I was like, "Oh, I'll just ask her." So I think it's all about planning ahead and figuring out who you can rely on. Again, not just after a seizure, but like when epilepsy is messing with your life, and just kind of
Yeah.
figure out who is the person or people that you can rely on, and getting that validation from them ahead of time, because your brain will try and talk you out of it. Your brain will be like, no, don't burden them. You don't need help. You'll be fine. But you have to figure out ways to, outsmart your own brain.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's unfortunately a common thing where we feel like we don't want to burden other people with
Yep.
with our epilepsy. And then
Yep.
that leads into, I think, also what we were saying about shame, and then that just makes you hide it, and then
Totally.
and that can also isolate you because, like, some people end up almost like hibernating, like, I don't want to leave my place because then I have to deal with it publicly, and I don't, so it's
Yeah.
this whole thing. Whereas it's so interesting because having more awareness and education in the general public and mainstream media, like the difference that that could make in our lives in terms of people not being like, what am I supposed to do, or
Hmm.
not fully understanding, but then also, like you were talking about your friends and just the importance of having such a good support group around you that you can talk to and that are there to support, is great. Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that would be huge if more people understood, you know, just epilepsy, even our own community too. Like I'm still like I still find myself so ignorant about certain things, and every time I learn something new, I'm like, oh, I really should have known that, and like I really should have known more before I was diagnosed because it runs in my family, and I have family members with epilepsy, and I'm like, it's still something that embarrasses the hell out of me how little I knew until I was diagnosed. But I literally just attended a conference virtually at Cornell with an attorney there who was doing a presentation and talking about the stigma of epilepsy. And by just attending it virtually and like being in this room where no one is connected to epilepsy, she's not connected to epilepsy. She's just noticed that there is a huge discrimination against people in the workplace with epilepsy. And I was like, this is so amazing, like to see it, like you said, mainstream, to see this room full of people at Cornell, like learning about epilepsy. She was very kind to invite me to it, just because of the podcast. And I was just this fly on the wall, like, oh my God, I feel so seen. Thank you. Thank you for caring, guys. Like, this is little steps like that, like, are so big. And big steps, like the film that you're doing, are so big, like so huge. I am so excited for this documentary because I think it's going to really connect not only to our community, but bigger than that as well. You know, our like right now society loves documentaries, right? Yeah. And I know this team is going to make a baller one, and I think it's gonna be one of those very eye-opening experiences that is the catalyst to a lot of forward movement. And I'm so appreciative for what you guys are doing, truly, like truly.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. That's makes me emotional. So I appreciate that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting because it's kind of like we channel our experiences into different forms of art or different forms of art or just creative outlets. And I love that because then it helps other people feel seen. And that's kind of blanking out right now.
All good. We're not live.
Yeah, we're all
let yourself blank out. Come back when you get it. We're all good.
And with all that being said, I wanted to see, like, in what ways do you hope that this podcast will impact the epilepsy community, and also outside of the epilepsy community, you know, the ones who don't know about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I think it's starting to help people feel seen and less alone. Yeah. That is the ultimate first goal, and to have like a little laugh along the way, you know. And I think that's starting to happen. I want that to continue to happen. I keep thinking about my cousin Jimmy and myself and how we were both living alone in our 30s and just feeling very isolated. And I just want to keep creating more resources for adults living with epilepsy, because when I was first diagnosed, I couldn't find anything for myself. I found so much for kids with epilepsy and teens and parents of kids. And that was 7 years ago, but and there's a lot more out there now, but at the time there wasn't. And so I just want to continue creating meaningful touchstones for people living with epilepsy, and a way for them to feel connected and have community, and provide resources too. Because like, even though What the F could be a story that people connect to, it's not a tailored resource. And I want to start providing more information about resources for people living with epilepsy, specifically adults, just because it's the audience, because I am an adult, I can speak to adults, you know, I can speak to the experience, and just to kind of fill that gap where there still aren't as many resources as possible. Mm-hmm. And then as far as like outside the epilepsy community, I'm just hoping that it helps people first. Like I see it in like little like waves. Like first is people with epilepsy, and then it's people who care for someone with epilepsy, and then there's like everyone else, right, who has no connection. And I just want to continue growing What the F into whatever platform that will feed that moment, and just to make it more palatable. Like I really need to create a TikTok account, which God, I don't want to, because I don't know how to do that shit, but I was in the UPS store, and I love the women that work there. So we were just chatting, and one of them was like, "Oh my God, I follow this woman on TikTok who has an epilepsy account." And I was like, "Oh, why?" She's like, "It was just interesting. I don't have any connection to epilepsy whatsoever." I was like, "Boom, that is what we need," you know? And it turns out, like, I know who she is, Javon Sherry, who is the founder of Epitome of Epilepsy in Florida. And and so I was like, Javon, you have a fan in Chicago who has literally no connection to epilepsy except you. And I think just creating more media like that, like what you guys are doing, is a great way to just keep reaching the outer spheres of our epilepsy community. So we're not just talking into a vacuum, but so we're actually creating change then by educating.
Yeah, exactly. This is all great. I love hearing that because it also it makes me really hopeful too, and just seeing how everything's coming together. And yeah, I think my last question to sort of put everything together is I wanted to see what advice you would give to others living with epilepsy who wanna, who aspire to pursue their passions or, take their situation and let it out through creative outlet and whatnot.
Yeah, I think I love when people do that, like you said, like make art out of our thing, you know? And sometimes it is very weird. I don't know if you feel this way. I'm like, it's so weird that epilepsy is my career. Because sometimes you can't separate the two.
Yeah, yeah.
And I spoke with someone recently who will probably be a guest on the podcast, and she was like, I just want to keep my epilepsy advocacy as volunteer work and not my work. And I was like, that is also a great way to look at it. So I encourage people to look at both sides, whether you want to make it like your career or whether you want to make it your, outside time of career things. But I think the most important thing is to kind of leave your ego at the door and look for feedback, look for guidance, create your own community in whatever sphere that you want to be in. Like I'm very lucky. I have a group of women writers that I'm in a group with, and like I have no business being there. Some of them are New York Times bestsellers. Like others are like they're getting their movies or their books made into films, and I'm like, hi, like I'm just working on a book one day, but they're greater than me. And I love that. And I love being around people who have achieved more than me and who can give me candid advice and feedback that you're not always going to like, and kind of just be like, and not that you have to take everyone's feedback, but it's a great way to just reassess what you're doing. And then this one too it's so cheesy, and I really did not know how much it mattered until now. But finding people and or companies and or groups or whatever that believe in what you're doing. Even if they have feedback, even if they're like, I would shift this a little bit, but they are like, I like what you're doing. I believe in what you're doing. And that's why I am so grateful for SK Life Science and Neuralis, because they are two companies who have gotten right behind What the F before it even existed. Like just had proof of concept. And they were like, yes, we believe, we're in. And I was like, okay, that's awesome, And then also like just finding people in your life that believe in what you're doing, even if they are not in that sphere. Like for example, like I just got married a month ago, and my husband, Steve, when we first started dating, there were 2 episodes of the podcast out. And I tell him all the time, like, you're so much less judgmental than me, because if I had met you and you had 2 episodes of the podcast out, I don't know if I would have dated you. But he believed in me, and he believed in what I was doing from the beginning. And then all of a sudden I was like, holy shit, this does matter when someone believes in you. I'm not saying go out and find a husband that believes in you. Just make sure you're surrounded by people who believe in you, because it does make a difference. And not all of them have to. It's not like I talk about this with all my friends, but I have a few that are like, real cheerleaders. And just keep yourself close to those people and make sure you talk about it with them, because they will celebrate your wins, and that will propel you forward.
Well, thank you for that. That was
Yeah.
really great advice. And thank you so much for joining us. My last thing would be is where can people hear the podcast? Where can they learn more? Find you on Instagram if you want to share that.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So What the F is on all platforms, Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Any follower or subscriber really helps. So if you want to just go ahead and do that, that would be wonderful. It means the world to me. Also on Instagram as What the F Podcast. Again, all that support and following it truly propels the podcast forward. Also, you can subscribe on the website to newsletters, and I do not bombard you with newsletters. I promise. I just let people know when a new episode is out or when a new season's coming. And I don't give your emails away because I am like a privacy princess. I don't know. I value privacy a lot, so I will not give emails away. But it's just a good way to stay in tune, and hopefully in the future it's going to be a great way to connect with resources because I really want to put that stuff out so people are aware.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you so much for sharing that. Thank you for being so open with us. And this was really inspiring, beautiful. And for everyone listening, go check out What the F Podcast.
And support Epilepsy the film because you'll be glad you did.
Thank you.